Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Marc's Action Figures. Today, we will be reviewing one of DC's more unusual pairings to come out of the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse line. On one side, you've got one of the fastest superheroes in the DC universe, the Flash. And on the other side, you've got a gigantic, super-powered Kryptonite shooting ape, Titano the Super-Ape. And this isn't just any Titano. This is a massive 12-inch mega fig paired with a 7-inch Barry Allen Flash in the Titano versus the Flash 2-pack from McFarlane Toys. The set was released in 2025 and includes the Flash figure, the huge Titano, a display stand for Flash, and 2 collectible art cards. McFarlane officially lists Flash at 7 inches and Titano at 12 inches. But there's a very interesting story behind this pairing. So before we get these two out of the box, let's take a quick look at the history of the Flash and Titano and find out exactly why these two characters ended up together. Let's start with the Flash, the man in red. And when I say the first Flash, I don't mean Barry Allen. The Flash actually dates all the way back to 1940 when Jay Garrick made his debut in the Flash Comics #1. Jay Garrick was a college student who gained super speed after an accident involving chemicals and radioactive experimentation. He became the original Flash of the DC's Golden Age. DC itself identifies Flash Comics #1 as the first appearance of the Flash. Jay's costume was quite different from what we normally associate with the character today. He wore a red shirt, blue pants, and of course that famous winged helmet. But eventually DC would reinvent the character. Barry Allen in 1956 was introduced for the very first time. It was in Showcase #4, published in September and October of 1956. And this was a hugely important comic. Barry Allen's arrival is generally regarded as one of the books that ushered in the Silver Age of comic books. Barry was a police scientist, later generally depicted as a forensic scientist working in Central City. In his origin story, Barry is struck by lightning while chemicals from his laboratory are splashed over him. Instead of killing him, the bizarre combination gives Barry incredible super speed, and the rest, as they say, is comic book history. Now, Barry isn't simply a guy who can run really fast. Over the decades, his powers have expanded tremendously. He can move at incredible speeds, react faster than ordinary human beings can perceive, and vibrate his molecules so that he can pass through solid objects, heal rapidly, and perhaps most importantly, interact with the mysterious Speed Force. And his connection to speed eventually gives him the ability to do something pretty extraordinary: travel through time and across dimensions. That's one of the reasons the Flash became such an important character in the DC Multiverse stories. In fact, DC describes the Flash as having mastery over not just speed, but time and different dimensions. And that's particularly appropriate for this figure because the Flash we're getting into and describing in this set is Barry Allen. Of course, Barry wasn't the last Flash. We've had Wally West, who first appeared in Kid Flash in the Flash #110 in 1959 and eventually succeeded Barry Allen as the Flash. We've also had other characters take on the mantle, including Bart Allen, and Jay Garrick's return as the Golden Age Flash. But Barry Allen remains one of the most recognizable versions of the character, and that's the Barry Allen we're getting here. Now, let's enter Titano. And this guy has a considerably stranger origin story. He is Titano the Super-Ape. Titano first appeared in Superman 127, published in February of 1959. And believe it or not, Titano wasn't always a giant monster. He started out as a chimpanzee named Toto. Toto was an intelligent chimpanzee who somehow became involved with Lois Lane. Eventually, Toto was sent into space as part of an experiment. And this is where things get wonderfully ridiculous in that classic Silver Age Superman tradition. While Toto is in space, his spacecraft passes through the radiation produced when uranium and kryptonite collide. And he becomes enormous. And he develops one particularly nasty ability: kryptonite vision. And that's right, Titano can fire kryptonite beams from his eyes. Lois Lane gives him a new name. She calls him Titano instead of Toto, of course. And Superman is eventually forced to deal with this gigantic creature before he can cause catastrophic damage. Now, in the original story, Titano the Super-Ape was written by Otto Binder with pencils by Wayne Boring and inks by Stan Kaye. And I think that makes Titano one of the quintessential examples of the wonderfully imaginative and sometimes completely insane science fiction storytelling of the Silver Age. Now, there's something also somewhat interesting about Titano. He's not necessarily evil in the same way as somebody like Lex Luthor, who has malevolent intent. In this original story, Toto is essentially an innocent creature who's transformed into something enormous and dangerous. He doesn't necessarily understand the consequences of what he's doing. So there's actually a tragic element to the character. He's basically an innocent chimpanzee who gets turned into a gigantic kryptonite-powered monster. And now we get into the really interesting part, because you might think, when you look at this box, okay, so what comic book has the Flash fighting Titano? And you would be right to ponder that question. There is a modern comic that provides the connection between these two figures, and that is the 1920, 23, 2024 crossover series, Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong. The series was written by Brian Buccellato and the art by Christian Duce and Luis Guerrero, and ran for 7 issues. And Titano appears in the very first issue. The story begins with the Justice League dealing with the Legion of Doom. A dimensional breach is created, and suddenly the DC universe is invaded by monsters from the Monsterverse. Godzilla, Kong, and other creatures begin appearing in the DC universe, and among those creatures is Titano. Titano is running loose in Metropolis, and here's where the Flash comes into the story. Barry Allen races to the scene to deal with the gigantic ape. But there's a problem. Superman gets there first. Superman defeats Titano before Flash can really get involved. In fact, Flash is basically racing towards a situation while Superman has already taken care of the problem. DC's own coverage of the issue describes Flash racing to the scene while Superman deals with Titano. So the Flash and Titano don't actually have a major one-on-one fight in the comic. They're connected through the events of Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong #1, but the actual confrontation with Titano is between Superman and Titano. And that's probably why some collectors might look at this 2-pack and wonder, why Flash? Well, now you know. The set is drawing its inspiration from this modern DC Monsterverse crossover rather than creating a classic Flash vs. Titano storyline. Now let's look at the actual packaging for this figure. The box is big, not as big as the previous 2 figures that we've reviewed on this channel, which is Superman vs. Godzilla and Wonder Woman vs. Godzilla. But it is quite big. And this is what we're going to be looking at. Now, this is the front of the box. And here's the side. And the opposite side, you have your quintessential legalese on the bottom. Is it upside down? No, I'm always wondering if I'm presenting this upside down or not, but it's okay. It is upright. And the backside with the beautiful art which is always expected in these Mega Figs 2-packs. On one side of the panel, you have Titano, and on the other side, you have a very beautiful rendering of Barry Allen, the Flash. So it is a big box, but considerably smaller than what you would get with the Godzilla versus Superman and Godzilla versus Wonder Woman. So, Titano is a big figure. It's a mega fig. You've got the Flash standing beside him, which really emphasizes just how massive the character is supposed to be. The packaging uses the standard black and blue DC Multiverse presentation with the DC logo and the DC Multiverse branding across the bottom. And I really like the window box because here you can see both the figures without opening the package. You've got the artwork of Titano and the Flash on the backside, and for collectors who keep their figures in the box, this is definitely a set that has some shelf presence. First impressions, let's start with the Flash. So this is a 7-inch Barry Allen Flash, as you can see here. And right away, I think the sculpt is very familiar to the DC Multiverse collectors. It's somewhat traditional comic book interpretation of Barry. It's a similar interpretation minus the yellow. This has the golden highlights as opposed to the classic yellow. You've got bright red costumes, golden lightning emblem, golden boots, golden belt, and of course the golden colored lightning bolt earpieces on the side of the figure. The sculpt itself is clean and muscular without going completely overboard. The proportions work well for a modern DC Multiverse figure. The head sculpt is particularly nice. You've got Barry's exposed lower face, the cowl wrapping around his head, and those distinctive lightning-shaped earpieces. And because this is Barry Allen, you get the classic look with golden hues rather than the one of the more radical alternate versions of the Flash. So it's still a classic look. Now, in terms of paint applications, the overall red and gold combination works extremely well. The emblem is nicely defined, and the golden boots really shine against the red costume. However, there is something that collectors should look at closely on this particular release. There have been reports from collectors of noticeable differences in the shades of red between different sections of the Flash figure, particularly around the gloves and lower legs compared with the torso and upper legs. So this is worth mentioning because it does. I can see that on my figure, on my version. If you look closely at the lower legs, the plastics are not exactly the same hue as the thighs. The same thing for the forearms. They don't look the same. They don't seem to have the same color as the arms or the chest. So that could be a turnoff for a lot of collectors. Something to be aware of if you buy this set. In terms of articulation, McFarlane officially describes this Flash as having ultra articulation, which is the up to 22 moving parts. And of course, this is one of the elements that separates him from Titano. You've got ball-jointed head, butterfly shoulders, double-jointed elbows, wrists, torso, double-jointed knees, rocking ankles, and toe articulation. So there is plenty here to work with. And that's important because Flash is a character who really benefits from dynamic posing. You don't want your Flash standing straight up like he's waiting for the bus. You want him running, you want him leaning forward, you want him crouching, and you want him looking like he's about to take off at 1,000 miles an hour. And this figure gives you plenty of options for doing exactly that. In terms of accessories, well, this is where I think McFarlane missed an opportunity. The Flash comes with a display base, which is, of course, always welcome, but in this particular release, there's no lightning effects that you do find in previous McFarlane releases. And considering that the Flash lightning effects you have, this is a perfect accessory and a perfect pairing. Still, the stand is useful, especially for more dynamic running poses. McFarlane officially lists the display stand and 2 collectible art cards among the contents of the set. So you get these 2 collector art cards like every McFarlane release. One of them is Titano, and another one is the rendering of the Flash. Of course, these are the exact copies of what you see in the back of the box. And these also include bios for each card. Overall, I really like the Flash. It's a strong-looking Barry Allen. The sculpt is good, the articulation is excellent, the colors are classic, and he is extremely posable. The biggest negatives for me are the lack of lightning effects and the inconsistent red coloration that some examples exhibit, including mine. But as a standalone Barry Allen Flash, it's a nice figure. Now, let's look at the star of this set, like every one of the DC Multiverse versus Monsterverse crossovers. Titano. And I've got to say right away, this is a figure that probably got most collectors interested in this set. God, I love this guy. He's a very beautifully sculpted figure. Look at his arm here. Look at the mechanics on the arm. Now, McFarlane lists Titano at approximately 12 inches compared to the 7-inch Barry Allen, and gives you a better sense of the scale between the difference between the two characters. The Flash doesn't include that small Flash that you may remember is part and parcel of the three other sets. Superman versus Godzilla, Batman versus King Kong, and Wonder Woman versus Godzilla. This is not one of these examples. Most likely because Titano is probably not as big as King Kong, and most certainly it's a giant ape, but not a King Kong-sized ape. In terms of the sculpture, I think there's some credit. Credit needs to be given where it is deserved, and this is a very beautiful sculpt. You've got this gigantic gorilla body covered in textured fur, beautiful highlights like dry brushing, silver dry brushing over throughout the figure, which is beautifully done. It's got huge hands, massive feet, exaggerated musculature, and you've got all those green and mechanical looking elements that distinguish this version of Titano from a normal gorilla. The face is probably my favorite part. I just love the green tongue and those green eyes. And he's going to shoot some of that kryptonite laser rays at you, so you better be careful, Superman. You've got the open mouth, the teeth, the green eyes, and that almost feral expression. And the green detailing throughout the figure gives him that connection to his kryptonite-powered abilities, including the 3 scars on his chest. Now, collectors are going to notice something immediately. This Titano uses substantial design and retooling similarities to McFarlane's giant Kong figure from the Batman set. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. From a business standpoint, reusing existing tooling is something toy companies do all the time. And considering Titano is a giant ape, the Kong body is actually a pretty logical starting point. The important question is, did McFarlane do enough to make him look like Titano? The new colors, mechanical elements, facial treatment, and battle damage give him his own identity. A collector looking at this figure isn't going to mistake him from a standard Kong once the differences obviously become apparent. A collector review also notes the heavy reuse of the Kong tooling while praising the new Titano-specific elements. In terms of paint applications, this is pretty important because you've got the black fur and gray fur. The highlighting is fantastic. The chest is gray. You have those nice green scratches across them. The green elements around the eyes and body, and those green accents are what makes the figure pop. I also like the weathered, battle-damaged appearance. He doesn't look like a clean, brand new laboratory experiment. He looks like a creature that's been through a fight. Now, in terms of articulation, unfortunately, there's not much of it. He moves his arms, his hands, his wrists. Same thing for both sides. His head slightly swivels, but not much. There's no up and down. His chest does rotate, and that's it. There is no other articulation in the feet or legs or hands or the ankles or knees or hips. Nothing. It's just you just get the swivel on the waist, and that is it. Collectors have specifically criticized the limited articulation with reviews, noting that Titano is essentially a heavy articulated statue compared with the Flash. And I understand that argument that a figure this large and heavy would put a lot of stress on smaller joints. I just need to think of the giant NECA 18-inch figures, and when I pose them, the issues and troubles that I get with them, because they're so heavy, they do tend to, through time, the joints do tend to bend, the plastics do tend to bend. But I think McFarlane could have done more. Imagine with this Titano with articulated elbows, articulated knees, articulated hips, with ankle articulation, and you could have had an absolutely spectacular mega fig. Instead, you're somewhat limited in the poses you can get, if poses you can get at all. Now, there's another thing to keep in mind. Because this guy is so big and heavy, getting him to hold the dynamic pose can be difficult. He's got an enormous amount of plastic up top and relatively limited articulation down below. So for me, Titano is definitely more of a shelf centerpiece than a figure you're going to spend an hour constantly repositioning. But despite those criticisms, I really like Titano. He's big, he's imposing, he looks fantastic next to the Flash, and let's face it, how often do you get the opportunity to put a giant Kryptonite shooting Super-Ape in your DC collection? That's what makes this figure special. And when you look at Flash meeting Titano, well, the scale is pretty cool. I mean, the Flash is a 7-inch figure, and Titano is about 12 inches. And when you put them together, Titano does tower over Barry Allen, as you can see. So, when I think of this interesting 2-pack with one figure that's very familiar and the other that's considerably more unusual, I mean, the Flash is a very good Barry Allen figure. He's a great sculpt, great articulation, classic colors, excellent posing potential, but the lack of lightning effects and inconsistent red coloration are disappointing. Titano, on the other hand, is a star attraction. He's absolutely massive. The sculpt is impressive. The paint and mechanical details are great. And he gives collectors a character that we don't see very often in the DC action figure world. The major downside is extremely limited articulation. So if I were to give it a score, I would give it a 6 on 10. The Flash is a strong figure, but he's not particularly new or groundbreaking. So is Titano. So there you have it. The McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Titano vs. Flash 2-pack. You've got a character who has been part of the DC history since the Silver Age, and a gigantic Super-Ape who originally battled Superman. And a Flash who actually races towards Titano in the pages of Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong, even though Superman gets there first. And I have to admit, I like this unusual pairing. Titano is definitely the reason to buy this set, with the Barry Allen Flash being a solid figure in his own right. Now, I'd like to know what you think. What do you think of Titano? Would you have preferred McFarlane to give us a Superman and Titano 2-pack instead? Or do you like this unusual pairing of Titano and the Flash? Guys, if you enjoyed this review, please give the video a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe to Marc's Action Figures. Don't forget to turn on that notification bell so you'll be the first to know whenever I upload a new review, unboxing, or action figure showcase. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your support. And as always, keep collecting, keep displaying, and I will see you in the next review.